Donald Trump wants to maybe start a trade war with China. How's that going to work out, you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's the meme going on around the mainstream media with Trump wanting to start a trade war. I would tell the media and people back home in the States that there's already been a trade war and you lost. You lost 70,000 factories in a decade plus. I mean, go to Detroit, go to Flint, go to the empty steel towns, go around the Rust Belt, go around the Southeast. I mean, these are the types of places I think a lot of people in Washington, D.C. and New York City don't get out to, and I don't think they understand it. These economies over here in Asia, Japan, Korea, they're mercantilist economies. They're going to game the trade system. I mean, you can't possibly argue anymore that we live in free markets. I mean, Japanese government owns 30% of their stock market and most of their government debt now. They won't buy cars from Korea. Korea won't buy cars from Japan. Here over in China, okay, China is at least lets us play in the game. But, you can't set up a car company here. You have to pay 50% to a local partner. Even Walt Disney World, they only own 43% of Shanghai Disney. The rest is owned by Chinese government companies. So you don't get into these markets without some kind of joint venture. So all these markets are not free trade. Free trade doesn't exist. It's kind of a joke with these academics running around with their textbooks talking about free trade. And free trade is good, and it is good for countries to specialize in stuff. But the U.S. has, because they have the reserve currency, they've been gamed for decades with people smashing their currencies down against the dollar and with unfair trade practices. And so we get to the point where we are now where the U.S. can't make anything for themselves. They only produce half the vehicles that are sold in the country. They can't make a phone. They can't make a television. They can't make a washer and dryer. And we get to this point where we're basically living in a financialized welfare state. If you're close to the printed money in Washington, D.C., in New York City, and in California, you're okay. If you're anywhere else, you've had a rough couple decades.
And now Trump is talking about a trade war, but as you point out, there's been a trade war going on for decades now. How does he address this problem, or does he really understand the problem, Dan? And is there really anything he can do to rebalance this global trade picture?
Well, I think he understands it. I think he understands it at a very basic level, and he's got a lot of guys around him that have suffered greatly from unfair trade. Guys like in steel industry, the steel industry here, they have cities here that make more steel than the entire United States. They make more steel in China in 6 weeks than the United States makes all year. So, I mean, we basically lost our steel industry. I mean, it's barely been hanging on. So does Donald Trump understand it? Yeah. Do you have to be very careful with trade? Absolutely, because we all exist in this. We're like the Soviet Union, right? We can no longer make anything. Our economy is close to collapse. And if we turn too quickly, the whole thing could just fall down like a house of cards. So my advice to him or to any economic policy planners, we need to do this step by step. Do we need to do we need to make $2, $3 items in the United States? No. But why is it that we can't basically produce anything, including high-tech goods? If you look at our imports and exports in the United States, we look like a 19th century economy. We export soybeans and scrap steel and scrap paper, and we import computers and solar panels and vehicles and all this other kind of stuff. So, so I think he understands it. It's going to be a very delicate. He's inherited a Ponzi scheme basically in the United States economy, and with the taxes, it's going to be a great start. If you can get the corporate tax rate down from the second highest in the world at 38% down to something 15 to 20%, you're going to see a jobs boom in the United States. In fact, everyone I talk to in China, they're all talking about bringing manufacturing to the United States because they realize they're going to have to do that or they're going to get taxed on it.
Of course, is $1 trillion in reserves that they've blown through to try to manage this Ponzi scheme. They're going through reserves pretty quickly, Dan. What happens when they just run out of reserves, Dan?
Yeah, they're down to $3 trillion. As you said, we've gone through $1 trillion in slightly over a year, which is an astronomical number. Now, they've built up most of that $4 trillion in about 4 or 5 years, went through $1 trillion in a year. China made the mistake of keeping their currency too low for too long. I was arguing 4 or 5 years ago, you need to let the renminbi appreciate to a natural level. It would have probably went down to 5 or 6. And then now as you get the economy has weakened and it can go down, they could just let it go down slower. But they're trying to keep it propped up. China has kept, in fact, against most other currencies in the world, the Chinese RMB is up very much against everybody else, especially against emerging economies, Turkish lira, Brazilian real. I mean, these currencies have collapsed, but China's up big against everybody, with the exception of the dollar's down 8%. Now, to keep the Chinese RMB up there, as you said, they've been going through the currency reserves. A lot of that, though, a lot of the outbound M&A in China that people hear about, the currency flight, so to speak, there's actually hidden strength there. I mean, China, 2015, $100 billion outbound foreign direct investment. Last year, $200 billion, so doubled. This year, it could go up to $300 billion. Chinese state-owned companies are being given money by the government to go out and buy assets, technology, energy in Europe, in the United States. Your European viewers will know it. Look how many football teams have been bought in Europe. 8, 9 of them. Aston Villa. I mean, the list goes on. There's a bunch of them. But all this money's coming out of China to buy up assets, because you can't run trade deficits for 2, 3, 4 decades. That money eventually comes back, buys up your assets, and turns you into a sharecropper in your own country. And that's the next phase for the American citizen, is to become a sharecropper.
Yeah, that's right. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. All right, Dan Collins, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Max.